Hi everyone. Losing a loved one to suicide is a difficult and painful experience, and it's natural to feel a range of emotions, including shock, anger, guilt, and sadness. Coping with the suicide loss of a loved one can be a long and challenging process, but there are things that you can do to help yourself through the grief and loss process. And in today's video, we're going to be focusing on some of the things you can do to cope in the aftermath of a loved one's suicide. But before I get into that, just a couple of disclaimers to go over. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of British Columbia, Canada, and this video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute or replacement for advice from your doctor or mental health professional. Now, with those things out of the way, let's start talking about coping with suicide. Now, it's important to point out that suicide involves the death of a loved one, and it's natural to experience a sense of grief and mourning associated with the loss of someone that you loved. However, this grief and mourning can be complicated in the case of suicide, and I've done a previous video on some of the complex emotions and thoughts that you might experience following the death of a loved one from suicide. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I'd encourage you to check out that video as well. So with that understanding that the grief and mourning process in suicide can be more complicated, what are some of the things that you can do following the suicide death of a loved one? Well, one of the first things to do is to allow yourself to feel a range of emotions. It's normal to experience a wide scope, a wide range of emotions after a loved one's suicide, including things like shock, anger, guilt, and sadness. It's important to allow yourself to feel and express these emotions in a healthy way. So part of this is understanding that these varied and potentially confusing emotions are normal following a suicide death. And it's important not to try and suppress or push these emotions away because they're confusing or uncomfortable. Now, the next thing, as obvious as this may sound, it's extremely important to make sure that you're taking care of yourself following the suicide death of a loved one. You need to take time to rest and care for your physical and emotional needs, and it's important to prioritize self-care following the death of your loved one. Now, this is far easier said than done, as there are often numerous demands that can fall upon you following the sudden death of a loved one, including things like funeral arrangements, dealing with their estate, supporting other family members who are grieving with the sudden loss. It can be easy to get caught up in all of these other things, and what ends up happening is that you lose sight of taking care of yourself, and this runs the risk of burnout. So, what do I mean when I say it's important to take care of yourself? The idea is to engage in activities that put fuel back into your gas tank. Things like making sure you're eating well, trying to get enough sleep, getting physical exercise, taking time to rest, and even trying to engage in activities or hobbies that you enjoy doing, even if you have no interest or desire in doing those activities. These are all important for maintaining your physical and emotional well-being and ensuring that your gas tank doesn't get drained. It's important to reach out for support and to build a supportive network of people that you can talk to about your feelings and the loss you've experienced following the suicide death of your loved ones. This can include talking to friends and family, sharing your feelings and thoughts with loved ones you trust and who will listen and support you. If you're part of a faith community or a religious community, seeking out support from members of those communities, even for very practical needs, such as helping out with meals or childcare. You might want to consider joining a suicide survivor support group. Support groups provide a safe and confidential space to talk to other people who've experienced similar losses. They can be a valuable way to connect with people who understand what you're going through and learn and share different coping strategies that they may have found helpful or that you found helpful and you can share those with other people. You may also want to seek out professional help. A psychologist, therapist, or counselor can provide guidance and support as you navigate the grieving process. It can also help you process the complex emotions and thoughts that you might have following the suicide loss of your loved one. Another important way of coping with the suicide loss of a loved one is to talk about your loved one. Talking about a loved one who's died by suicide can be really difficult, but it's also an important part of the grieving process. By talking about them, you remember and honor them. Talking about your loved one can help keep their memory alive and honor the life they lived rather than having their death obscure their memory. Talking about them and their suicide death can help you process emotions such as grief, guilt, anger, and confusion. And by talking through these emotions, you could find ways of coping with them. Talking about your loved one can help you make sense of what happened and find some closure in the situation. It can also be important in reducing the stigma of suicide. Talking openly and honestly about suicide can help reduce the feelings of stigma and shame that often surround suicide death. And it might encourage other people to reach out for help and support if they're feeling those types of things. Another important step in coping with the suicide death of a loved one is to find ways to honor their memory. This can include things like creating a memorial for your loved one. You might find it comforting to create a physical space in your home or some object to remember your loved one by. Things like making a memory board or having a scrapbook of pictures and memories of your loved one. Related to this, you may want to plant a tree in their memory. By doing so, you're planting someone in your loved one's memory that will grow and thrive over time. And it can be a place that you can go to remember your loved one. You can participate in activities that were meaningful to your loved one. You might find it comforting to engage in activities or hobbies that your loved one enjoyed doing. You might find it helpful to donate to a cause that was important to your loved one. If your loved one supported a particular cause, if they were interested in environmental protection, taking care of animals, political activism, cancer research, whatever it was that they were passionate about, you might want to think of ways of making a donation in their memories to organizations that supported those causes. It can be important to share your loved one's story. You might find it healing to share about your loved one's life and their struggles in order to raise awareness about mental health and suicide prevention. In this way, you might find some sense of meaning in their loss. Additionally, you might find it comforting to share about your loved one's life and the positive impact they had on the world and other people. And in this way, you honor the life they lived rather than just allowing the way they died to define their life and their memory. Another way of coping with the suicide loss of a loved one is to educate yourself about suicide. There can be lots of stigma related to suicide, and you may have held beliefs about suicide that now conflict with how you feel about your loved one who took their life. By better understanding some of the common emotional reactions and thoughts associated with the loss of a loved one to suicide, it can help normalize how you're feeling. You might have never realized how common it is for people to experience complex emotions such as anger and guilt following the suicide death of a loved one. And by being aware of these normal emotional reactions, you're in a better position to take steps to manage feelings of anger and guilt. So for example, if you find yourself extremely angry following the suicide death of your loved one, it's important to identify the source or sources of your anger. This can include taking some time to think about what specifically is making you angry about your death. Is it your loved one's decision to end their own life? Are you angry at them because they essentially killed someone that you loved? Are you angry at other people or circumstances that you feel played a role in their suicide? Other family members, their job, their doctor? Are you angry at yourself for not recognizing what they were going through or not doing more to have helped them? By better understanding the source of your anger, you can begin to start working through the anger and getting a sense of how realistic or reasonable these anger-provoking thoughts actually are. It's also really important to find healthy ways to express anger rather than bottling it up or lashing out at other people. And some healthy ways of expressing or managing anger include things like getting exercise, journaling, or talking to a trusted friend or family member about how you're feeling so that they may be able to give you a different perspective on the situation that is less anger-provoking. It's important to understand that there is no one best way to cope after a suicide death. The grieving process is unique for every person, and some of the skills and these tools and these tips I've talked about may not be helpful for you. Some of them may, but probably not all of them will be. The key is to be patient with yourself, understanding that the process of healing after a suicide loss can be a long and difficult journey. It's important to be kind and patient with yourself, giving yourself time to heal and recognizing that you will never be the same as you were prior to their death. And I hope that some of these ideas that I've talked about in today's video can give you a bit of comfort in your healing process. If you want to learn more about common emotional reactions and thoughts following the suicide death of a loved one, I'd encourage you to check this video out. So that's all for today's video. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.